Have you ever thought about how much weight we give to how long our relationships last? It's like we only value relationships that are marathon runners, outlasting every other runner on the track. We throw parties and celebrate milestones like anniversaries for weddings, dating, and even work. On the flip side, we tend to view ending long-term relationships, be it with a person, a job, a place, or organization, as a loss, like a game over screen in a video game. Today, I will argue that you should value your short-term relationships as a source of joy, knowledge, and personal growth. I will address 3 myths about short-term relationships and then offer some advice at the end of the video about how you can give more attention to the short-term relationships we all have during our lifetimes. You'll see that some of this thinking can even apply to our long-term relationships. We seem to want our relationships to be stuck on repeat, going on and on, just like those dance marathoners back in the 1930s and 40s. We seem to think it's not about who dances the best, but who keeps dancing the longest. It's giving out gold watches to those who stick with the same job for 40 years, throwing a bash for people married for 25 years, or giving out trophies for being in an organization for 5 years. You might even call someone your BFF just because you've known them since primary school. It seems like it's all about time, consistency, and never changing. That's what people see as a top-tier relationship. Well, I'm Eric Vanman, an associate professor in psychology at the University of Queensland in Australia. My graduate training was in social psychology, and one part of that training focused on close relationships. Although there is plenty of great research in our field about those long-lasting, close relationships, like what makes a marriage work, who's likely to fall in love, what predicts breakups, there's relatively scant research on short-term relationships, which probably reflects the lesser value we place on them in society. Unsurprisingly then, researchers in this area usually treat relationship length as an outcome of a happy, healthy relationship function. However, in 1980, 2 psychotherapists, Emily Coleman and Betty Edwards, published this book, Brief Encounters: How to Make the Most of Relationships That May Not Last Forever. I happened to come across it on my mother's bookshelf when I was in high school, and it had a big impact on my life because it made me think that both short-term and long-term relationships are important. Let's start with the idea of a brief encounter that appears in the title of their book. It sounds a bit 70s, right? Like something from the movie Looking for Mr. Goodbar. One-night stands, singles bars. That's a term you don't much hear anymore. And seedy disco scenes. But according to Coleman and Edwards, we have brief encounters hundreds of times in our lives. They wrote, "Brief encounters are short periods of time when people are so close to one another that they can almost hear the other's heartbeat, sense the other's thoughts, and feel the other's joy and pain. You encounter the other person in a vitalizing way, exposing facets of yourself, beliefs, experiences, feelings, not ordinarily exposed, and you feel heard and seen and understood by the other. The amount of time you spend together isn't important in a brief encounter, nor how long you've known each other or where the encounter occurs. It could take place while you're sitting next to someone on a plane, spending some time at a camp or a workshop, or it could be while you're sitting with someone you've spent 20 years with, but you suddenly see and hear each other as if for the first time. You see, the value of such brief encounters isn't related to time at all. You may become so absorbed in the interaction that you forget all time and place during the encounter. Have you ever had a memorable encounter with someone you didn't know before? I've had several of these experiences throughout my life. One that stands out was when I attended a workshop on open science methods in New Zealand back in 2018. I didn't know anyone there, including the other guest speakers. However, 5 of us went out to dinner one night in Christchurch and had several fascinating conversations. Everyone listened to each other, and I gained a new perspective on my work and how it relates to others. I have had many similar encounters, especially back in my early 20s when I had more time to be adventurous. As a university teacher, I've had the privilege of getting to know many students over the years. Sometimes I've shared personal experiences and mistakes more easily with them than my colleagues because they were open to listening. These brief encounters have benefited me by allowing me to express my feelings and receive support from others. It's common to have short-term relationships, such as working with someone on a project for a few months, having a roommate, or meeting someone who's only in town temporarily. Short-term relationships are more prevalent now than they were 50 years ago. These relationships may involve brief encounters or last for a longer period. Regardless of their duration, we can still gain valuable experiences from these relationships. Coleman and Edwards listed 3 myths about short-term relationships. Myth number 1, short-term relationships will hinder your long-term ones. Sometimes people who have a strong connection with someone may worry that forming deep relationships with others could harm their current relationship. However, it's unrealistic to expect one person to fulfill all our needs in a long-term relationship. Our partner may not have the time, energy, desire, or capability to meet all of our needs. By seeking fulfillment through short-term relationships with others, we may actually improve our primary relationship and find greater happiness. Myth number 2, short-term relationships make you shallow. Sometimes people are labeled as players if they openly talk about their short-term relationships and affairs, which suggests that society values long-term relationships more. However, it's important to recognize that both short-term and long-term relationships can be shallow and unfulfilling. Even a 50-year marriage is not automatically a guarantee of a deep and meaningful connection. Myth number 3, people who have many short-term relationships are using others, and this is bad. It's a fact that we need other people to grow. We can't do it alone. People find validation and fulfillment in being helpful and feeling valued. However, it's important to note that short-term relationships shouldn't be about abusing others. According to Coleman and Edwards, these relationships should be mutually satisfying and fulfilling, rather than making the other person feel like an interchangeable object. Coleman and Edwards provide excellent advice on how to derive happiness, fulfillment, and enrichment from short-term relationships. To achieve this, you must develop the necessary skills and mindset, which involve 2 key things. The first is, enjoy to the utmost whatever moments are spent with another person, no matter how few these may be. And the second principle is, make agreements with others to get more, much more, of what people can give one another to enrich their experience of life right now, instead of being limited by concerns about what might happen tomorrow. Because we want to remove the length of time as a criterion for a good relationship, notice how these 2 principles can apply to a relationship of any length of time. The first principle is easy to grasp, but challenging to apply. It emphasizes taking pleasure in every moment spent with another individual. I've often reflected on this principle since I first read it. Whenever I spend time with someone, I try to make the most of it. I aim to learn something new about them or gain new knowledge myself. This mindset also promotes brief encounters, as mentioned earlier. By being receptive to positive experiences with others, you increase the chance of having a significant moment that could impact your life later on. The second principle involves creating agreements with others to enhance the relationship, which may be challenging for some people. Coleman and Edwards delve into this topic extensively in their book. Such agreements can be as simple as meeting for coffee every Friday, or sending each other book chapters while they're being written. Alternatively, it could be a more formal agreement, such as dividing project tasks between partners or offering an apprenticeship with specific expectations and benefits. The key is to recognize that many of our brief relationships have potential for growth and to acknowledge this from the start. Often, however, we miss the moments that establish a short-term relationship, but it becomes apparent shortly after. Coleman and Edwards suggest that individuals should be direct and communicate their expectations to maximize the potential of these relationships. If you take things a step further, you'll discover that short-term relationships can be transformed into alliances that can benefit your long-term relationships. For instance, having someone's contact information could prove useful when you need information for work later on. Additionally, a short-term relationship could evolve into a long-term one. After all, it's hard to predict at the beginning of a long-term relationship how it will all turn out. If you think about it, how did you ever know at the beginning of your current long-term relationships that they would turn out long-term? Now, let's just focus a moment on romantic or sexual relationships. This study by Eastwick et al. In 2018, and I'll be sure to put the reference for it in the description below, found that in the early stages of short-term and long-term relationships, there isn't much of a difference in the mindset of people. For both types of relationships, There's a quick rise in romantic interest and sexual desire and the desire to self-disclose and a desire to care for the other. For several days or weeks, people destined to have short or long-term relationships are not really different from one another. They have an enriching, exciting relationship with that other person. Sometime down the line, however, romantic interest, desire, and the rest might start to fade for one or both of the partners. And this is what makes a short-term relationship different from a long-term one. The relationship ends. By the way, according to the data presented in this study, men and women are equally likely to lose romantic interest. Now, what's my point in bringing up this study? It goes back to principle 1. Enjoy to the utmost whatever moments are spent with another person, no matter how few these may be. None of us really knows at the beginning of a relationship whether it's going to become a long-term one. But if we go ahead and appreciate the moments we do have with a person we like now, someone who may provide us joy and fulfills our needs while we do the same for them, this friend, this lover, this work colleague, or whoever can still enrich our lives during the time that we have this relationship with them, even if it's a fairly brief time. This video only touches on the surface of a fascinating topic. I have a lifelong interest in the time course of relationships based on my personal experiences and research. I hope I've piqued your interest in the subject and that you'll consider the value of short-term relationships in your life. If you found it helpful, please consider giving the video a like and leaving a comment below, and I'll know that I should make more videos on this topic. I always like hearing from my viewers, and I would love to hear about any brief encounters or special short-term relationships you have had. I have some other videos about online relationships that you might like to watch here and here. And until next time, though, stay curious. Bye.